It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio. This is Kyle Hyman. I'd like to welcome back to the show Charles Shepard and Amanda Shepard from the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. Thank you for being here again.
Happy to be here.
I feel like we need a previously on art history. Last time you were here, if people missed it, definitely go back and listen to it. But we were talking about this dome that was built, cathedral in France in the 1400s, and how it's kind of a question of, was he doing it for prestige or for the glory of God?
Sure, yeah.
Which is a little bit open-ended.
It is, and I think there's a beautiful book about this, Brunelleschi's Dome, and the book gets quite deep into something I never thought of before. There actually were politics of the time whereby, and I'm probably contextualizing this slightly off track, but one order might be in charge of these three churches and wanting them to be taller, bigger, grander than the ones over there.
Like a religious order?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's almost like here's a diocese that wants to outdo the other diocese.
Sure.
That's the best way to understand it, I think. And it never occurred to me that every diocese wouldn't be exactly on the same page, even back in that day. And they weren't. And they're trying to gain favor and gain power. And again, never would have dawned on me that anyone within a diocese would desire any power at all. But it was all being sought after. So you've got that sense of this dome better be grander than anybody's dome because I want our church to shine. And Brunelleschi, whose ego says, no man can do this but me, and the battle is on. It just gets wild from there.
So the way you're describing it sounds very negative, that we shouldn't be competing against each other. We're on the same team, right?
Exactly right.
But at the same time, I suppose if we didn't have some kind of a competition, I mean, I've heard somebody say, competition brings out the best and the worst in people, right? But
Sure.
I mean,
Probably true.
Because of competition, it might do things greater than we would without it, right? But at the same time, it can turn into a prideful thing.
Well, and I think that time in history is a fractious time anyway, in a variety of different manners. The way that local governments operated, the fact that you had ruling class and gradually evolving not ruling class, but we have more money than the ruling class, and all those factors enter into these commissions and these competitions, and overall, I think it is a good thing. And when you look at that dome and you look at all the various cathedrals all around Italy, France, England, they got produced at that time, the church ended up being stronger for that. And the people ended up being the recipient of that overarching power of, I'm in the church, God is here, and I see it and feel it. And in my couple of tours of Europe as an art history student, going to the cathedrals was the most moving thing ever in the world. And if it's moving to us with all the things we see.
And you weren't Catholic.
No, he wasn't Catholic then.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and that speaks to something, and I'll be quiet. that speaks to something we brought up in the last program. Are you doing this for God? Or are you doing it for yourself? And I think, well, here's the thing. Even someone who hasn't realized that God has a relationship with me, even if I haven't woken up to that yet. And Brunelleschi might fall into that category. Sometimes you need a little something to shake you up and make you realize I should be responding to the God that has given me all this and the God that responds to me even though I'm a pagan.
Well, I think of two examples from Scripture that I think could set people on the right path. I think of the Tower of Babel. People were trying to build it as high as they could to get to heaven. Well, you can't get to heaven on earth. And so God taught them a lesson that, I'm going to scatter you and you're going to speak different languages after this. And then I think of Jesus knowing that he was God, but equality with God was not to be grasped.
Right.
And that might be something that the artists that we talk about are going to discuss should remember. We should give glory to him with all of our talents and the great things that he allows us to do, but not so that we can be on par with him.
Right. So all of this is happening, we're talking about the 1400s, which is right before the Protestant Reformation.
Yes.
How does that play into all of this?
Well, at the start, prior to the Reformation, if it wasn't for the church, all this great art wouldn't have been produced, and the whole notion of a Renaissance wouldn't have been produced. But they're fueling this training and these commissions launches all this. Now, the Reformation gives us in the church a major challenge, and Martin Luther wants more people to believe that he's right than in the Catholic Church. He's living in the same city as the printing press gets developed. And so he's quick to think, I could print my word, and you're still trying to figure out how to get your word out through art. And that puts the Catholic Church on another track to try to stand against the Reformation and move the Catholic Church along. Well, the artists kind of fall off the wagon at that point. You know, there are fewer commissions being made by the church, and artists turn, where can they turn? They turn to this rising middle class we spoke of. And that group of people has money, but that group of people is not interested in spiritual art. They're interested in secular art. I am a very wealthy farmer. Paint my wife, paint my kids, paint my dog, paint my fields. They're bringing it right down to earth and keeping out of the heavens.
We're talking with Charles and Amanda Shepard from the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. A little bit of art history lesson here. I have a lot to learn. And so I like this transition. So we're focusing less on God and more on ourselves.
Yes.
And so does the quality of art suffer in that? Or do we see just as good of art being done of people and families that was being done for the church?
For a while, you know, a century or so, the quality doesn't change. And even though the subject matters have changed, we're still looking for very realistic things. We're still looking for beautiful things, even if those things are somebody's pasture or somebody's horse or house or whatever have you. But in my mind, you've laid the groundwork for a deeper, more disconcerting change to happen through this secularization. I read something yesterday, Cardinal Mercier, in the early 20th century, said the intrinsic aim of art, the only aim worthy of art, is the beautiful, the conception and the expression of the beautiful. And so after this period, that still is a watchword in art, even though it is more earth-based and more selfish. But you've opened the door to beauty leaving too, because maybe we shouldn't worry about beauty. Maybe we should go anti-beauty. Maybe art should be about the non-beautiful. Maybe art should be about the wild or the weird or and there, just after Cardinal Mercier said that, who do you get? You get Cubism, Futurism, Surrealism.
And those are all things that I studied in school, Charles studied in school, and we love it all in its own way. But you have to know where that came from and what came before it to know how its evolution took place. And what Charles said about the Reformation and these artists needing to find commissions within the families, it's not that God or the spiritual life or the divine was completely eradicated from the art. It was more hidden. You know, the farm of the family might have been kissed in sunlight, and that sun bathing it was the blessing of God on my land. And, you know, the bounty is because of God, and I am wealthy because of God. And so it's not that it was not there, it just was much less explicit. And people were also equating their good fortune with God's blessing. And that's where we see disparity between the classes, that if you didn't have as much, then God was not looking kindly on you like he is me, the wealthy landowner, and I have this beautiful painting to prove it.
Something today we might call the prosperity gospel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so when Charles brings us up to the 20th century where, you know, and I love the 20th century in art. I love the competition between artists, the ridiculous grandiosity that artists, you know, were beauty is dead, painting is dead. And when you're studying it in school, you're like, whoa, whoa. And then, you know, you look back on it and you think, you know, such ego. But it is an interesting concept. It's sort of like Brunelleschi's dome. Brunelleschi's saying, I'm going to build the dome that no man could. And then these artists in the 20th century declaring that beauty is dead. How could you claim that? You know, the claims are just as egotistical, and yet as much as I criticize it, I still love it. You know, it's still my thing. And being a Catholic in this age, you just have to look at it for what it is and recognize where it came from.
And going back to that quote that you had from the Cardinal, he doesn't mention anything there about it being religious or it being about God or about the saints or about Jesus. It's about beauty, which ultimately points us to
God,
the one who created all things.
Exactly. And that's the context that comment came from.
Yeah. So how do we get back to that idea that whatever we're doing, whatever we're creating, whatever we're promoting, whatever we're sharing on social media, to get back to that idea of sharing and creating something beautiful?
Well, if we go to the late 19th until the very earliest of the 20th century, it became the peak of American landscape painting. And it was an interesting spiritual moment in that the painters wanted to paint without having someone commission them. They wanted to paint the American wilderness because it was created by God, and they didn't want to get paid to do it. They wanted to do it first, and somebody wants to buy the painting later, that's fine. But they saw it as their noble calling to show what God has given us. And in each of those pictures, and it is indeed the most famous period of American art there has been yet to date, in each of those pictures, every individual that's human is minuscule in this bountiful landscape bathed in gold and silver and red sunsets. And in God's scheme, we're just little ants. And that was a real resurgence, I think, of the spirituality of art.
Kyle, to answer your question, in, I guess, our contemporary life, and even here in Fort Wayne, Charles and I all the time see artists striving for the beautiful, and even if they're not explicitly introducing God into their work, there are so many artists that want to make beautiful, high-quality work that honor nature, that honor the beauty of the material, that honor simple things of human life. And I think of our friends Susan and Stephen Shake, who happen to be Catholic, and they make jewelry together. And Stephen loves silver and gemstones, and Susan is really all about the design, and together they make wonderful jewelry. And Susan said, if I can make a ring or earrings or a necklace that someone looks at every single day and sees something beautiful, then I've done what I need to do. So it's not that it's gone or dead or that, we need to get back to something. We could get closer to something, but, there are a lot of people that are not that far away from their work in beauty.
Do you see a shift with religious art at the time? So as everything's shifting, does religious art and architecture just kind of take a pause and we don't see a whole lot of progress happening?
It takes a pause and it takes a vivid leap in another whole direction, in a direction of scouring away. I wouldn't want a house in this capital M modern world. I wouldn't want a modern house to have my grandmother's things. She was old school. She was out of style. She's sentimental. I want clean geometry, scrubbed bare of any sentiment and any love, and that's beauty. So we go through a real big period of that, which even to today lingers in some aspects of that field. And what drives a lot of this over time is philosophers and writers who are trying to reason out what you might think, the mystery of faith. Well, I'm going to prove what this is. And I prove it by actually eradicating things, not trusting. And so the artists actually end up listening to philosophers and reading, and that starts making them think, whether they be architects or whether they be painters, okay, so I'm going in this me first direction in a world that's also becoming ever secular, ever more secular. So there's a comfort level.
And as far as church commissions, I think that era of commissioning the grand art is pretty much over. I guess I'm not sure if they're commissioning new works for any of the big cathedrals or churches.
I think what happens is that your priorities change in a way, and the church is so established that adorning it more, putting more ornament is really less necessary. Feeding those that are hungry is more important. Taking care of those that don't have is more important.
Right.
And taking care of our parish, keeping it
sure. At the time,
alive.
the art the art was about education, about growing the church's numbers, and the church has since exploded since that time. So now our needs are much different, as you say, helping the needy.
Yeah, I think initially, when you go back to Brunelleschi's day, Michelangelo and Gilberti and all these guys, that you needed to see some symbols of the healthy vitality of the church, and these cathedrals provided them. Of all the different churches I had seen before I actually was a graduate student and went to see the great cathedrals, I couldn't have imagined how grand they would seem. That you can't really take them in stride. They just literally take your breath away, and that's what they needed to do then. Mm-hmm. And now our focus is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. We want Mass to take your breath away. Mm-hmm. A good homily to take your breath away.
Well, I hope you can come back for more of this, because I really enjoy these discussions, and there's never seems to be enough time. But where can people follow up with Fort Wayne Museum of Art?
Sure. Social media, FWMOA, and then FWMOA.org.
All right. Thank you so much, Charles and Amanda, for joining us today.
Sure.
Appreciate it.